I never expected that the quiet park just a few blocks from the hospital would become the place that shattered my sense of peace. As a nurse working night shifts in Portland, I needed something to help me shake off the weariness that always lingered after a long, exhausting day. It was a place where the night noises of the city didn't reach, where I could walk with my dog, Milo, and find some solace in the stillness. At least, that's what I thought. The park, hidden in a secluded corner between quiet neighborhoods, was supposed to be my refuge. But things change. They always do. I remember that first night when everything felt off. Milo, a calm and collected black lab, had always been my source of comfort. No matter how difficult the night shift, he was there by my side, his presence calming my nerves. On that particular evening, we took our usual route by the creek. The air was crisp, and the sky was a deep shade of navy blue, the kind of sky that made you feel like the world was holding its breath. We reached the old bridge that arched over the creek, the water trickling beneath us like a distant whisper. Milo suddenly stopped in his tracks, his ears perked, and his body stiffened. I couldn't see anything, but the tension in his stance made the hairs on my neck stand up. I crouched down beside him, calling his name softly. Milo. He didn't respond. Instead, he tilted his head toward the woods across the creek. And then, as if on cue, he barked. It was a normal bark at first, but as it echoed through the trees, it warped, distorted, echoing back in a way that felt wrong. The sound came from across the water, yet it sounded as if it was coming from everywhere at once. It was like a shadow clinging to his bark, a sickly version of his voice that crawled under my skin. At first, I told myself it was the wind. Maybe the trees were playing tricks on my mind. Maybe the echo just made it sound strange. But Milo wasn't letting it go. He growled low in his throat, his stance still rigid, his eyes wide with fear. "Come on, Milo," I said, standing up. "It's nothing." But something inside me told me it wasn't nothing. The air had changed. It was thick now, heavy with a strange tension that felt like it had settled into the ground itself. I tried to shake it off, brushing away my growing unease, and led Milo back toward the path. As we walked, I couldn't stop looking over my shoulder. I don't know why. Maybe it was the way the trees had begun to sway unnaturally, even though the wind hadn't picked up. Maybe it was the feeling that something was watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake. I kept telling myself it was nothing. I was just tired. The night shift had drained me more than usual. The next few nights were worse. Milo, usually so calm, began acting increasingly strange. He wouldn't leave my side, his eyes constantly darting to the shadows, his tail stiff and unyielding. At first, it was just small things: his hesitation at the entrance to the park, his refusal to go near certain areas. But then, it escalated. He started barking at the trees, his bark sharp and frantic, his body shaking with a fear I couldn't understand. One night, we stood by the bridge again, the sound of the creek barely reaching my ears over the pounding of my own heart. Milo's body was taut, his gaze fixed on the darkness across the creek, his ears flat against his head. Then, as though something snapped inside him, he let out a howl, a desperate, wild sound that shook me to my core. But it wasn't just Milo. From across the creek came the bark again, the same distorted, twisted bark that seemed to come from the very depths of the woods. This time, it was louder. Closer. It was as though it had crossed the creek, stepped onto the same path we were on, and was now standing right behind us. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. And then Milo growled. A deep, guttural growl that shook his entire frame. His teeth were bared, his lips pulled back in a snarl as his gaze locked onto something in the shadows. I turned around slowly, my heart hammering in my chest. But there was nothing there. Just the trees. Just the darkness. "Stop it, Milo," I said, but my voice was weak, and I could feel the hairs on my neck standing up. Something wasn't right. The bark, the way it echoed, the way Milo was reacting, it was like we weren't alone. Like something else was out there with us, mimicking Milo's every move, stalking us from the shadows. The distorted bark came again, this time right behind me, close enough that I could feel the air shift as it resonated in my bones. I spun around, expecting to see a figure standing there, but there was nothing. Just the darkened trees, swaying eerily in the windless night. I could feel my heart beating in my throat, my pulse racing with the urge to run. Milo was frantic now, his body trembling with fear as he pressed himself against my legs. I looked around, desperate to make sense of it all, but all I could hear was the eerie bark echoing around us, louder and closer. "Let's go, Milo," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the noise in my head. I turned and started walking back toward the car, trying to keep my breathing steady. But with every step, I felt like the shadows were stretching out, like they were reaching for us. Like they were coming alive. The bark didn't stop. It followed us, its distorted echo filling the space around us. I could feel it, pressing on me, suffocating me with its presence. It was like something was waiting, something that had been patiently watching, studying, and now, it was hungry. By the time I reached the car, I was shaking. I threw open the door and jumped in, slamming it shut behind me. I locked the doors, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. That whatever had been mimicking Milo's bark, whatever had been watching us, was still out there. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Everywhere I went, I could hear the bark, distant yet close, like a ghost that had attached itself to my thoughts. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see Milo's terrified face, hear the twisted echo of his bark. And then it happened. The final straw. It was late, too late, and I had just finished another grueling night shift. I was too tired to care, too drained to worry about the park. But when I stepped outside, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I couldn't explain it, but the air felt thick again. Heavy. The same sense of dread washed over me as I walked to my car, Milo beside me, his tail tucked between his legs. That's when I heard it. The bark. Right behind me. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I rushed to my car, started the engine, and drove off as fast as I could. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I couldn't bring myself to do it. And that's when the barking began to haunt me. It followed me. In my dreams. In the corners of my mind. The twisted version of Milo's bark echoed through the halls of my house, through the empty rooms where I sat alone, waiting for it to stop. But it never did. It never will. Whatever had claimed that park, whatever had been mimicking Milo's bark, had followed me home. And I knew deep down that it wasn't finished with me. It was late one night when my best friend Matt told me his story, the kind of story that makes your skin crawl and leaves a strange chill in your bones. I'll never forget the fear in his voice as he recounted what happened. He wasn't the same after it all. His eyes were darker, his words weighed down with a strange heaviness, and it felt like he wasn't entirely here anymore. I listened carefully, as I always did, but something was different that night. Matt wasn't the same carefree, adventurous soul I'd known for years. Something had broken inside him. And as he spoke, I began to realize the horror he had gone through was far worse than anything I could have imagined. Matt had always loved quiet places. You know, the kind of spots where you can escape the madness of everyday life, places where you can clear your head. He was a college student, but his introverted nature made him gravitate toward the solitude of the outdoors. Dog parks were his favorite, peaceful, out-of-the-way places where he could relax, think, and just enjoy a little quiet. It started with a simple walk. One evening, after a particularly grueling exam, he took a detour through his usual dog park, the one just a few blocks from campus. It wasn't a fancy place, just a small, tucked away spot behind an old, almost forgotten strip mall. The park wasn't busy, sometimes he was the only one there, and that suited him just fine. The wind whispered through the trees, and the soft rustling of leaves was the only sound, punctuated by the occasional bark of a dog in the distance. But on this night, something felt wrong. He had parked his car and started walking along the path that wound through the park. His mind was clouded from studying, his body craving rest. That's when he saw it. A white foam box, discarded haphazardly behind his car, like someone had simply thrown it there without a care. It was strange because, usually, the park was kept fairly clean. There were no littering issues, and this wasn't the sort of place you'd find someone leaving something like that around. Curiosity got the better of him, and he approached the box, kneeling down to inspect it. As he lifted the lid, a wave of stench hit him. It was raw, spoiled meat. The kind of foul odor that made your stomach churn. It was thick, overwhelming, and it took all he had not to gag. "What the hell?" Matt muttered to himself, recoiling. He figured some careless dog owner had left it behind, maybe as food for the strays. But as he moved away, he didn't think much more of it. He tossed a quick glance back at the box and went on his way. Days passed, and Matt's routine returned to normal: exams, classes, late-night study sessions. But one evening, after another stressful day, he found himself back at the same park, parked in the same spot. And that's when it happened again. The box was there, waiting for him. It had reappeared exactly in the same spot, as though it had been placed there deliberately. It wasn't the same as last time. It was almost as if the box had been waiting for him. He felt a strange pull, a gnawing sense of discomfort deep in his chest. He didn't know why, but the box felt wrong. Like it wasn't supposed to be there. He tried to convince himself it was just coincidence. But he couldn't shake the feeling. Over the next few days, Matt noticed something strange. The box didn't disappear. It remained in the same spot, untouched, as if it was never moved, like a fixture of the park. The most unsettling part? No one else seemed to notice it. People passed by without a glance, as if the box didn't even exist. The park was usually empty, but it made him feel watched. Every time he walked by, he couldn't help but look at it, wondering if something, or someone, was behind it. It wasn't until one night when he made the mistake of inspecting it further that things started to get real. There were claw marks on the box. Thin, shallow scratches marred the surface, like something had raked its claws across it. The marks weren't just random, they were purposeful, jagged, and deliberate, like someone or something had been trying to get inside. At that moment, a cold shiver ran through Matt's body. The park, the box, the eerie stillness, it all felt wrong. That's when he decided to do what any rational person might do: research. Maybe the box had some sort of explanation. Maybe it was some weird prank or some local ritual. So, he turned to the internet, searching for any connection the park might have to strange events. What he found chilled him to the core. Years ago, a person had gone missing in the very park Matt now walked through. The person had vanished without a trace, leaving behind nothing but a few confused witnesses and a lingering sense of dread. The authorities had never been able to find them, and some local rumors suggested the person had been taken by something unnatural. It wasn't long before the strange feeling that had begun gnawing at Matt turned into full-blown paranoia. That night, as he lay in his dorm room, trying to sleep, something horrifying happened. He heard the sound of scratching at his window. At first, he thought it was just the wind, but then the scratching grew more persistent, almost rhythmic. He froze, his mind racing. The room was dark, and his heartbeat was deafening in the silence. Slowly, he got up, his limbs heavy with dread. As he approached the window, he hesitated before peering outside. There, sitting at the base of the window, was the foam box. But it wasn't just outside his window. It was as though the box had followed him. He felt the blood drain from his face, his stomach twisting in a nauseous knot. Someone knew where he lived. Someone or something was watching him. The days blurred together after that. Matt couldn't focus on anything. His studies, his friends, his life, they all felt distant, as if the box had taken away his sense of normalcy. He couldn't escape the feeling that someone or something was always watching him. Every time he stepped outside, he felt eyes on his back. Every noise, every shadow, felt like it was connected to the growing dread that haunted him. And then came the night when the box appeared again. Only this time, it wasn't in the park. It wasn't outside his dorm window. It was right in his apartment, sitting on the doorstep, waiting for him. The line between reality and paranoia had long since blurred. Matt could no longer tell if the box was part of some sick joke or if it was something far worse. His fear twisted his thoughts, spiraling into madness. He couldn't shake the feeling that the box, and whatever was behind it, had been watching him, waiting for the right moment to strike. I saw it in his eyes, the terror, the hopelessness. He wasn't just afraid of the box. He was afraid of what it meant. What it had become. And that fear, that terror, was eating away at him. I couldn't help but wonder if the box was just the beginning of something much darker, something that had taken hold of Matt and wouldn't let go. As I listened to him, I couldn't help but feel the weight of his words pressing down on me. I wanted to tell him everything would be fine, that it was all in his head. But deep down, I knew that whatever was going on was far worse than any of us could understand. And as Matt finished his story, the silence between us grew. Neither of us could shake the feeling that something was out there. Watching. Waiting. It was a routine, the kind of everyday habit that fades into the background of life, a simple walk through Glenmore Park after work. The park was calm, the air crisp, perfect for unwinding after a long day of work. I had no particular reason to doubt the peace it gave me. It had been my escape, my way to clear my mind. For years, I had taken that same path, night after night. The same familiar trees, the same quiet breeze, the same trail I walked with the steady rhythm of someone who had long made it a part of their life. But that night changed everything. I had walked past it hundreds of times, never really paying attention, just moving through the motions. The statue of the soldier and his dog stood near the memorial at the far end of the park. It was a simple thing, really. The soldier, carved in stone, was kneeling beside a dog that looked as though it was ready to leap forward. They were frozen in time, locked in some quiet tribute to a forgotten past. That's what I thought. I hadn't given it much thought before, it was just part of the landscape. But that night, something about it caught my eye. As I approached the statue, I noticed something different about the dog. It was subtle, almost imperceptible at first. The dog's head, which had always been facing forward, was now slightly turned to the right, as if it was looking at something, or someone. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't seen it like that before. The statue's rigid structure shouldn't have allowed for such a change. I took a few steps closer, trying to rationalize it. Maybe the angle of the light had shifted. Maybe I was just imagining things. But then I noticed the muddy paw prints. They were scattered around the base of the statue, as though the dog had been walking there, its paws leaving marks in the soft earth. I was stunned. I stood there for a long while, unable to shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Who would have been walking around the statue in the first place? And why had I never seen the muddy prints before? They weren't fresh, they looked old, worn, like they had been there for days. But I couldn't remember seeing them any of the previous nights. Something in me wanted to dismiss it, to walk away and forget about it. But the unease I felt, it lingered. It gnawed at me as I continued my walk, and when I got home, It was all I could think about. The dog's head had shifted, and those damn muddy paw prints haunted my mind. I told myself it was nothing, just a trick of the light, maybe an animal that had wandered through the park and left the marks. But deep down, I knew better. The next night, I couldn't stop myself. I went back. I had to see it again, to make sure I hadn't imagined it. As I walked down the same path toward the memorial, my breath quickened, and my heart rate picked up. I wasn't sure what I was expecting to see. I just knew I had to look. The park seemed eerily quiet, the kind of silence that wraps around you, filling the space with its own heavy weight. When I reached the statue, I stopped dead in my tracks. The dog's head had turned even further to the right. It was almost as if it was looking directly at me now. I stepped forward slowly, the crunch of gravel underfoot sounding too loud in the stillness. The muddy paw prints were still there, but there were more of them now. They led away from the statue, deeper into the shadows where the trees grew thicker. My mind raced. I couldn't rationalize it anymore. There was no logical explanation for what I was seeing. That's when I felt it, the sensation that I wasn't alone. It was like the air had thickened around me, like the park itself had become an extension of the statue, a place where the unnatural could exist. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and my skin tingled with an unease I couldn't shake. I looked around, half expecting to see someone watching me, but there was nothing. Just the trees, the statue, and the darkening sky. I couldn't stop myself. I started following the paw prints. My steps felt heavy, like I was walking through thick mud. I don't know what compelled me to do it. It wasn't curiosity anymore, it was something darker, something that whispered in the back of my mind. I walked deeper into the park, following the muddy trail that led me into the dense trees. The further I went, the more the park seemed to shift, as if it was alive, pulsing with something unseen. But there was nothing. The paw prints ended abruptly near a grove of trees. No sign of anything else. I stood there for a moment, confused, but then I felt it again, the presence. It was watching me. I turned quickly, but the park was empty. I couldn't explain the feeling. It wasn't like fear. It was something much older, something ancient. And it was right behind me. I hurried back to the statue, my legs trembling, my mind racing. I couldn't shake the thought that whatever was happening in that park wasn't natural. It wasn't something I could explain away. I reached the memorial and looked around, half expecting to see the dog's head turn again. But when I looked, the statue was still. The dog was facing forward once more. I thought I had imagined it. Maybe I was just tired, maybe my mind had played tricks on me. But that night, as I lay in bed, I kept hearing things. The sound of footsteps, distant but unmistakable. The echo of a low growl that seemed to reverberate from the shadows. I tried to convince myself it was just the wind, just the park settling in the night. But I knew it wasn't. I knew something had changed. Something had awakened. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I couldn't stop thinking about the statue, about the dog's eyes, about the muddy paw prints that had appeared out of nowhere. The next day, I talked to a local woman I knew who had lived in the area for years. She was a quiet woman, always keeping to herself. I asked her about the statue, hoping to find some explanation, some logical reason for what I had seen. She looked at me strangely, almost as though she had expected my question. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she told me something that chilled me to the bone. Most people avoid the memorial after dark, she said. The park has a strange reputation. People say strange things happen there at night. Strange things that no one can explain. I asked her more, but she wouldn't say anything further. She only warned me to be careful, to stay away from the park after dark. But it was too late. I had already crossed that line. I had already seen too much. The next night, I couldn't stay away. I had to see it again. I had to know what was happening. But when I arrived, the statue was gone. The dog, the soldier, the memorial, everything was gone. All that was left were muddy paw prints, leading into the trees and disappearing into the dark. I stood there for a long time, trying to comprehend what I was seeing. The statue had disappeared. Just vanished. I felt my heart pound in my chest as the cold realization hit me, this wasn't just a statue. It wasn't just a memorial. It was something more, something that shouldn't have existed in this world. The feeling of being watched grew stronger, more intense. I didn't belong there anymore. I couldn't stay in that park. I couldn't stay in that town. I packed up everything and left, leaving behind the memory of the statue, of the dog, and of the unnatural presence that had followed me. To this day, I don't know what happened in that park. I don't know what the statue was, what the dog was. But I do know that something dark, something ancient, was there. And it still haunts me, every night, in the quiet darkness, when I close my eyes. I never went back to Glenmore Park. And I never will. I left it behind, but it has never left me.